When I was a kid, I asked a ton of questions, kind of like my son, now that I think about it. And in most settings, people seemed to like that I was always asking so many questions. They liked my natural curiosity. Unfortunately, I got a very different kind of reaction in church. People didn't like it as much there. And one day, I must have been about 5 or 6 years old, we were studying the book of Genesis in Sunday school. And right as we finished the creation narrative, I was kind of distraught. I was flipping ahead and I didn't see what I was looking for. So my hand shot up and I said, Teacher, what about the dinosaurs? I don't see anything about the dinosaurs. Where are the dinosaurs? And you guys should have seen the look of panic that washed over this poor teacher's face. And to be fair, this teacher, was like one of the other kids' parents or something. They were not a theologian. But I'll never forget what they said to me. So in this kind of panicked response of theirs, they said, well, back when Satan ruled the earth, he buried the dinosaur bones to confuse you. Yes, so let not your heart be troubled, little boy who loves dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are not real. So as you can imagine, this is devastating information for me. I loved dinosaurs. I didn't want them to be a scheme of the devil. But unfortunately, this became kind of a theme for me in church, not just as a child, as I grew up, and sometimes now. I tend to get really bad or really concerned answers to my questions. And you see, it's that second kind of answer, the really concerned type, that did more damage than the first. You've probably heard these kinds of questions yourself. What's wrong with your faith? Why are you really having these questions? And there was a chilling effect to that. Naturally, I inferred from these experiences that I wasn't getting satisfying answers to my questions because there weren't any. Now, of course, I no longer believe that through my experience studying apologetics, but as I reflect on that time in my life, I'm aware of two major hurdles still facing the church. The first is that we need to be equipped with better answers when people come to us with questions. It's not enough to have, one or two people in a church that can provide good answers. We need to be trained up and down the congregation. And second, we need a better model for going to people, for reaching out to an increasingly skeptical culture. We need a model that helps us invite questions, explore answers, and build relationships. Now, I want to suggest an easy and memorable method that will help us take our training in apologetics and use it as a more effective tool for evangelism in 3 easy steps. I'm going to refer to this as the 1-2-3 model, and I hope you find it really simple. First, the 1 is 1 person, 2 principles, and 3 barriers. Now, by mastering these 3 easy steps, Christians will be emboldened and more effective ambassadors for Christ. Okay, so the first step in the method is to recognize the value of the 1. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells 3 parables back to back: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Now, do you notice something that these 3 parables all have in common? In each case, one thing of great value has gone missing, and in each case, that lost thing is sought after intentionally. And finally, when the lost thing is found, there is great rejoicing and celebration. This is the only time in the Gospels where Jesus tells 3 consecutive stories to make one point. And Jesus' point is that he values the 1. So we should value the 1. This is God's heart for the lost. And so as we move through our time together, I want to invite you to think about, who is your 1? Right? Most of us have someone in our lives that we're praying for, that we would love to see come to faith. Write that name down, or just keep it in your mind as we move through our time. The second step in the 1-2-3 model is to adopt 2 key principles. The first principle is that everyone's spiritual journey is a process. We don't have to hit a home run in every single at bat, and we don't have to get to the cross in every conversation. The second principle is that God is responsible for the results. God is responsible for the results, so should we be scared to fail when we share the gospel? If God is responsible for the results, do we have to know the answer to every question that may come up? I don't think so. And importantly to me, do we have to have everything in our lives figured out? And again, if God's responsible for the results, I don't think so. The third and final step in the 1-2-3 model is to recognize the three barriers to faith. Now, here's kind of a picture of what the traditional model of evangelism looks like. It says that people are standing on the edge of a chasm, and they have questions about God and questions about the chasm, and eventually they see that Jesus on the cross fills the void and builds a bridge back to God. They make a decision to follow Christ, and they begin a relationship with God. There's nothing wrong with this model, and people still meet Jesus this way. But people often aren't standing at the chasm in our culture anymore. And in fact, they're way further back. They're not ready for the conversation about the cross. Even more, they aren't even standing on the line, right? They're down in a hole, and we call that hole the emotional barrier. Now, oftentimes, these are people that have been wounded by Christians in the church. They may also be people who've experienced what they believe is pointless suffering. And all of this results in isolation. Now, the solution to this problem is relationship. The emotional barrier is overcome by somebody cultivating a friendship and demonstrating the love of Christ. So the way that we get out of the hole is hope. We as believers in the risen Jesus extend hope to others, hope that there's a way out and that we will walk with them. So suppose somebody rises from this hole, the emotional barrier, and they're moving along this line towards the chasm, and they hit another wall, a barrier to faith that has to do with skepticism about the truth claims and trustworthiness of Christianity. This is the intellectual barrier, and very often it results in indifference. Now, fortunately, all you guys know exactly what to do here. This barrier is overcome by honestly and intelligently responding to questions and objections that a seeker raises about God and Christianity. Now, I should note that the emotional barrier very often is masked by the intellectual barrier, as we know. So it's important to know who we're talking about, and you guys know what to do there and to ask your questions. Now, finally, the third barrier is the natural barrier. People may work through the emotional and intellectual barriers that they have, but are nonetheless unwilling to examine spiritual things, or they just reject Jesus outright. It could be pride, self-sufficiency, or desire to continue certain behaviors that keep them at arm's length, something like that. And, maybe there's a social expense to accepting Jesus. That was certainly the case for Nabil Qureshi. Now, I should note that the natural barrier is common to all of us because we all have a sinful nature. And the natural barrier is overcome by persistent prayer. Here it's the role of the Spirit to change people's hearts. We simply rely on God because, once again, He's responsible for the results. So to summarize, we begin by valuing the one, we base our approach on two principles, and then we have a strategy to address the three barriers to faith. Now, as you think about those three steps, here's what I want to suggest that we could all do in response. Think about who would be your one. Think about that one that we were talking about before. Second, do you know where they are on their spiritual journey? And if not, find out. And then finally, discover their barriers. If you already know what they are, then great. Let this model guide you to a strategic approach the next time that you're with them. But if you don't know, find out. Ask them questions. And in each step of the 1-2-3 model, I encourage you, as always, to invite questions, to explore answers, and to build relationships.